The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to be conducting a webinar on identifying past trauma responsible for current distress. This is one of my passions. I've found that this occurs more often than not in my practice, and I see it as one of the vital options we have for helping clients gain some relief over symptoms. So let's start. Okay, we're going to be starting with a description of some of the issues faced by our clients that are struggling with distress and trauma from the past. And it includes many adult survivors experience trauma, and they go through life struggling with both immediate and latent issues concerning distress of the past. These issues can be seen in their ability to interact in relationships, sustain employment, family situations, also with a lot of legal issues or substance abuse related issues. A lot of the issues that we're seeing is some of the abuse and trauma occurring in childhood has not been properly resolved. So therefore, they are re-experiencing them to some extent in adulthood, and we're seeing a lot of struggles and a lot of issues that are becoming more prominent as they have entered adulthood. These challenges and impediments also create barriers for healthy development, really limits opportunity for employment, but also limits opportunity for healthy relationships and engagement. The common characteristics of someone currently struggling with issues from the past include addictive behaviors. That can include excessive substance abuse and alcohol abuse. You also see that prevalent in a lot of promiscuity, a lot of impulsive sexual acts, injurious behavior. You see it in their inability to tolerate conflicts. And this could be with the individual and someone else, and it can also include being around other people that are involved in a conflict. The feeling is distressing and intolerable for someone who has a history of trauma. They also exhibit an inability to tolerate intense feelings, preferring to be around someone that is happy more so than someone that is struggling with their own negative emotions, such as extreme sorrow, anger, anxiety, etc. Another common characteristic includes the innate feeling that he or she is bad. This says a lot of different things. For the individual, it conveys to them the belief that they are worthless. They carry little to no value. And for some individuals, the belief that he or she is dirty. And that can be conveyed to you in a variety of different ways in treatment and can color their outlook on life. They're also more likely to have black and white thinking, which we're going to touch on again a little later on. And that really means all or nothing thinking. There's no fine areas, there's no gray areas. And they hold on to this type of belief in this thinking, even when it has the potential to cause them harm. There are no modifications of plans, no adjustments to thinking. It's either this way or that way or no way. They also are more likely to harbor suicidal thoughts and ideations, which basically means they express and exhibit chronic and repeated thoughts of ending one's own life. Again, with this type of thinking, the belief is that life will not get better for them. They do not see happier times, and because they do not see happier times, They ascribe everything that happens to be negative, and nothing good will come out of anything in their life. They're also more likely to have disorganized attachment. And what that means is they have a variety. They may have a variety of intense, short relationships, impulsively entering and engaging in relationships. You may have some that also refuse to engage in relationships or maintain a relationship, meaning even when there are issues, they choose to end the relationship without working on the relationship, although it may be salvageable. They are also more likely than not to enter into multiple dysfunctional relationships or frequent love-hate relationships. Another common characteristic is disassociation, which is emotional distancing from a person, place, or anything that causes emotional distress. This could be done with physical distancing, avoidant behavior, or even daydreaming. Emotional flight that takes them away or carries some sort of what they see as a reprieve from any emotional distress or anything causing them to become anxious or angry. They're more likely to suffer from eating disorders, which includes anorexia, bulimia, obesity, etc. Excessive sense of self-blame, taking on an inappropriate responsibility for just about any and everything. Everything is their fault. And they typically do not ascribe responsibility to someone else, even when it's warranted. They make excessive apologies. Many times it's for things that are beyond their control. So, in fact, the responsibility does not lie with them. It lies outside of them, yet they're taking ownership of whatever happened. Inappropriate attachments. They may have inappropriate attachments to a mother, a father, a mother-father figure, and they develop attachments to dysfunctional or unhealthy people. They also seem to struggle with intense anxiety, periods of intense anxiety or repeated panic attacks. Intrusive thoughts, flashback, body memories, and nightmares. Intrusive thoughts can consist of thoughts that they're bad, thoughts that what happened was their fault, even with flashbacks, vivid images of what happened, almost as if it's happening again. I mean, seeing it clearly, so much so that it becomes a little challenging with identifying, did it happen then, or is this happening now? Distressing nightmares, repeated nightmares that come back that limits an individual's opportunity to get a restful sleep, but causes a lot of issues the following day when you have to remember and perform a lot of cognitive acts. Body memories, sometimes ascribed to somatic pain, where they may feel pain that, from something that happened in the past that is not happening now. Most of that is mental. It's not happening in the here and now, and maybe that injury has cleared up. It's no longer persistent. It's not active. And they may also have unexplained body aches and pains. We all know that sometimes when we feel something intensely, emotionally, it can appear as a physical pain, like intense stress, often mimics headaches, heart palpitations, similar to a heart attack. And a lot of these things are brought on by intense anxiety, especially if you're a survivor of a traumatic experience or a traumatic childhood. Depression, ongoing depression, sadness that doesn't seem like it's going to go away. It doesn't seem like it's going to get any better. Victim role. And this is true for a lot of people that have experienced trauma, repeatedly taking on a victim position in a current relationship. This could be seen as entering into a relationship where you have an aggressive partner and maintaining that whole identity of victim without transitioning to a survivor. You're no longer in that situation. Therefore, you don't need to put yourself back in that situation. The rescuer role, repeatedly taking on a rescuer role, even when inappropriate to do so. Some of this occurs out of a belief or a desire to rescue someone in a manner which they wished or hoped to have been rescued from their traumatic experience. Self-harm. This can include self-injurious behavior, self-destruction, or self-mutilation. Suicidal actions. Suicidal actions, behaviors, or previously failed attempts at ending one's own life. The perpetrator role. Taking on a perpetrator role that includes angry, aggressive behaviors in relationships. This can sometimes be a misguided attempt to take power back, and often doing so at the expense of someone else. Intense fears. Unexplained but intense fears of people and places. Cultural, ethical, and gender and other considerations about how that affects our interpretation of trauma. Oftentimes we hear, why didn't she or he report the abuse? Why didn't they just speak up? Well, some of the factors that are often not considered when reporting past trauma includes culture, ethics, and gender. Culture refers to a group of people that share similar or the same beliefs, norms, and values. Culture affects not only how we report information, but how we report abuse, how we interpret trauma. For example, in some cultures, expressing emotional distress, sadness, or reporting abuse may be seen within that culture as a sign of weakness. Or it can serve as a catalyst that brings shame upon the family. So sometimes disclosing this can be devastating, not only because of the current implications of what happened, but because of what it can bring out with regards to your family, the stress it can cause to your family and within your culture. So there are going to be times when culture plays a larger role than we initially anticipate in how we see ourselves and how we interpret what has happened to us. Cultural norms affect the likelihood that abuse occurring in childhood is both discovered by an adult or disclosed by a child. Now, there could be many reasons behind this. That includes the child feeling as if he or she did something wrong, dirty. It can also occur when there's a strong cultural belief in maintaining virginity at the time of marriage. Specifically, if sexual abuse occurs during childhood, this individual can be seen almost as if damaged goods. It can bring shame to the family, although this individual, this child, did not consent, could not consent, and was victimized in childhood. But because of some of the cultural beliefs surrounding virginity, surrounding abuse, it is often not spoken about, and the individual suffers in silence. Culture affects also what is reported to authorities, not wanting to bring outsiders in, especially if there are legal like lawyers and police officers from different backgrounds, different races, different cultures, to bring someone into your personal life, to bring someone into your family, can be very intrusive, especially when you feel that they don't understand your culture. They may not completely respect your cultural beliefs. So to bring someone into your culture and expose what has happened within the context of your family can be devastating, not just for the survivor, the family as well. Gender. Well, gender also impacts how a person interprets trauma. Gender affects interpretation of trauma in many ways. For example, men are often expected to be strong, silent, and commanding, not to express any weakness or pain. And we often see this in when children are very young. When a girl falls down, she is coddled. She's asked if she's okay. Her wounds are tended to. But when a boy typically falls down, he's expected to get up, shake himself off, and get back to play, not to cry. Because I'm sure we've heard boys shouldn't cry. When you have abuse that occurs with regards to gender, it can impact the survivor in many ways. It could translate to the survivor that he or she is weak. They should be able to manage what has happened to them. They should be able to get over it. And we know with emotional pain that it doesn't discriminate race, culture, age, gender, sexual identity. None of those things matter. It's how we process and how we interpret what has happened to us. But a lot of us are still holding on to a lot of issues related to gender, especially when you're looking at sexual abuse. Sometimes there's a fear and embarrassment for a male when reporting being sexually assaulted, being ashamed, feeling like he was unable to protect himself adequately. However, when this abuse occurs, someone who has been traumatized in the past, this individual did not have the ability nor the capacity to protect himself. So to expect him not to suffer some sort of distress and have some emotional trauma behind that is irresponsible. So we have to really look at how that impacts how these young men respond to traumas of the past, and how we can kind of work with them to get them to understand that victimization and trauma does not only extend to women, but it extends outside of women and can impact anyone. It is not gender specific. And let's talk a little bit about how ethics affects our interpretation of trauma. This may come as a surprise to some, but ethics plays a large role in our interpretation of trauma. One of the reasons why it affects our interpretation of trauma is how we perceive the person that comes in for therapy. Sometimes what we perceive to be trauma or some sort of abuse may not be perceived in the same way by the individual seeking treatment. They may not even be in treatment for that reason. So we have to understand our clients and understand what their reasons are for seeking treatment. And if it's someone who is culturally different from us, it is our responsibility to develop or have some sort of understanding of their cultural background. We have to understand that we can't automatically assume within the context of one culture this is abuse, but it necessarily is seen as abuse in the context of another. Our responsibility is to understand how whatever happened to the client impacted or affected that client personally, how he or she interpreted what happened to them. Not ascribe what we feel they should have felt about what happened to them. That's a personal experience, and that's a personal interpretation. So our goal is to really help clarify and help them process a lot of the feelings associated with whatever is causing distress from childhood, helping them clarify feelings and helping them take ownership of their life, not remaining stuck, not remaining in the past, but existing in the here and now rather than the past, but having the ability to also see a future. Dysfunctional belief systems. They can include self-referencing. Now, self-referencing is the belief that others focus only on you when you do something wrong or something bad. And we see that a lot in people with a traumatic past. You know, no one notices me, no one sees me unless I do something wrong or something horrible. I can enter a room and be unseen, but the minute I do something wrong, then everyone notices me. Most of the time, that's not necessarily true. That says a lot about the individual rather than what's truly going on. That says a lot about how he or she feels about themselves. Selective abstraction, the belief that he or she is measured by their failures. Now, most of us have been taught at a pretty young age not to value ourselves based upon failures. It is not, I'm sure we've heard, it's not our ability to fall, but our ability to rise from the occasion. So when you're dealing with someone who has a traumatized past, self-abstraction plays a large role in some of the things that they're feeling. Okay, I've had multiple failures in my life. And because I've had these failures and these setbacks, you know, I'm not worth that much because I'm always going to fail. The truth is, we all fail. We don't fail just once or twice. We fail multiple times. The only difference is a lot of us do not measure our self-worth on our failures. We measure our self-worth on what we're able to give back to our community, how we give back to our family, how we care and nourish and treat others, etc. We typically don't see our failures as some sort of measuring stick to self-worth. Excessive responsibility. The belief that he or she is responsible for every bad thing that has occurred in his or her life, even child abuse. Now, this could be very dangerous. And it can be dangerous for a number of reasons. Specifically for someone who felt that they were responsible for being abused in childhood. You know, had I not done this, this wouldn't have happened. If I had just done that, it wouldn't have happened. Maybe if I, wasn't so this or wasn't so that. The truth of the matter is, when trauma and abuse occurs in childhood, the individual doesn't have any control really on what happened, especially child victims. They do not have the say, the strength, or even within certain families and cultures, the right. So to absorb and take on that responsibility excessively, like you are responsible, it creates a lot of emotional distress because it puts the blame and the responsibility squarely on a place that it shouldn't be. it puts the responsibility that you could have done something differently. And if you think you should have done something differently, then what you're really saying is you are responsible for being abused, maybe even invited it. And that's a dangerous line to really walk on, especially if you have an abused past. It's saying that you could have changed your past. You could have done something that prevented this from happening to you. And 9 times out of 10, that's just not reality. It's just not. Dichotomous thinking. Viewing the world in extremes. Remember we spoke about earlier, black and white thinking? Nothing in between, no gray areas. This, again, is a dangerous way of thinking. It's all or nothing. And things are typically not that extreme. We can typically make adjustments. When something doesn't work, we can kind of look at things and make gradual adjustments to accommodate the things that aren't quite working well, may need some modification, or may need to just be done away with. When you have dichotomous thinking, if this doesn't work, things are just going to fall apart. I have to do this or this won't happen. This thinking is so extreme at times that even when there are possibilities of harm, I'm going to do it because I can't think in a way to allow me to adjust my thinking, to plan accordingly, make modifications. It's either this or it's that or it's nothing at all. And that's simply not true. Most decisions and most options we have in life, there are always choices. Some choices are better than others. Some choices are more comfortable than others, but there is a choice. It is never really 100% or nothing. I mean, sure, there are some decisions we make that will have negative consequences, but at the end of the day, it's still a choice. You can either do this or do that. You have a choice, or you can kind of modify it to go along with what your needs and what your responsibilities are. You don't have to be restricted to this or that, all or nothing. There are some gray areas, and for most of us, there are some areas of color that we have the option to integrate a few things to make our options more enhanced, to enhance our opportunities, and create a healthier living environment. Okay, self-referencing. Wait, I did that one. Cognitive techniques to challenge dysfunctional belief system. Now, what could we do? I've always found that journaling really helps. What I've found with journaling, especially free writing, it allows you to write down whatever it is you're feeling, what you're thinking, without being totally cognizant and conscious of what you're writing. It's free. You're writing whatever comes to mind. And I found that that's helpful because sometimes when we're writing, we're monitoring what we're writing as we're writing it, not wanting to come across too strong, too sad, too negative, too this, too that. But with journaling, it's just an expression. Typically, there are no negative or positive connotations associated with it. You're journaling your feelings. Feelings are never right or wrong. They just are. They exist. So I found that they're very helpful with challenging dysfunctional belief systems, especially because sometimes it's hard for us to identify what we truly believe, or it's hard to identify what is dysfunctional about our thinking until we see it concretely. So in my opinion, I found that it was very helpful for a lot of the patients that I've been working with. they became more intimately aware of their feelings. They began to really take stock of what they were doing, what was making them unhappy, what was bringing displeasure to their lives, and really think about what would make them happy. What is causing this feeling of stuck? And actually journaling about potential options for getting out of that stuck state. What would my life look like? What would I like to do? What would I like to see in the future for myself? And this ability to journal and see it allowed it to become a reality for a lot of people. And the next one, challenging pre-existing beliefs. I believe in the power of confrontation. When you have a dysfunctional belief system, it's kind of hard sometimes to see the forest through the trees. Sometimes it's hard for us to even see that our belief system is a little dysfunctional. So when you see it, when you kind of confront it, wait a minute, that doesn't really sound right. Or how am I assuming responsibility for my traumatic past? How am I taking ownership of that? Why am I taking ownership of that? What could I have done differently? So when you get your clients to challenge those belief systems, those dysfunctional belief systems, you also kind of trigger a catharsis. They began to see, well, wait a minute. How could I take responsibility for that? I was a child. There was nothing I could have done. And once you trigger that cathartic moment, you can bring about change, workable, positive change. Because anyone that holds on to dysfunctional belief systems, unless it's challenged, you're just going to keep on that cycle of maintaining that dysfunctional belief, thinking, assuming that that is the right frame of ideas. This, I can't figure out what's going on, but I'm going to keep thinking and doing what I'm doing. And by confrontation, especially subtle confrontation, it motivates your client to really look at things differently, really put things into a different perspective. Mindfulness. I love mindfulness for a lot of reasons. It gives us the opportunity to work with clients on how they see their current situation, but also how we can monitor whether their perceptions and feelings about things have changed. Sometimes it's not easy for them to see that things are transitioning, things are improving, because they're so used to almost catastrophizing sometimes their current situation. So getting them to really think about things from a mindful approach gets them to really identify that they have made progress. Sometimes it's hard for us to see when we've made progress. It's hard for us to kind of give ourselves credit. Well, yeah, I got that done, and I was able to accomplish that. I was able to do that. We see it, but we don't own it. And seeing that that's an accomplishment can be very difficult for some people. Social, physical, and thinking exercises that allows the client to become aware of emotional and behavioral patterns. I think this is good for anyone. This allows us to identify when we're more likely to engage in patterns of emotional and behavioral patterns that may be unhealthy for us. When you are confronted, I'll give you an example, when you're confronted about late work, or you're in a relationship and you're not giving your all to the relationship, you want to be able to see what precipitated what. For example, if your assignments are late at work, what was going on at that time that those assignments were late? Was it that you felt overwhelmed? When you become overwhelmed, what do? Some people shut down. They engage in avoidant behavior. They engage in the thinking, I work best at the last hour. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, and I can't tell you how many times that's been wrong. What happens is sometimes when you work under anxiety and distress, things become even more chaotic, more disorganized, more distressing, and you become more anxious. So that's one of the stories that we tell ourselves. But we have to look at why we engage in certain behavioral and emotional patterns. Identifying them is the best way to really modifying them, working on them, and making a concerted effort to extinguish that pattern. But we have to be able to identify those triggers. What precipitated what? Why did I do this? What was going on before this occurred that allowed that to occur? What was I feeling? Getting in touch with your feelings, getting in touch with triggers is typically the only way to stop these things from occurring. By understanding what these triggers are, you can intervene even in your own life in a meaningful way that can allow you to move forward appropriately, to progress in what you need to do, to have a healthier relationship. And it can go on and on and on, but you have to understand and know what your patterns are. Homework assignments. Homework assignments can be used also as a tool, especially after therapy. And that can include sometimes when you're in therapy and you have the client thinking about some of the distressing issues that are currently impacting their life, issues from the past. Homework assignments are very helpful because it allows them to really think about the content of the session after it has ended. So I've seen that this works really well because sometimes you lose some of the therapeutic benefits. You lose some of that once they have exited the therapy session. Then it's almost like playing catch up at the next therapy session. You're trying to remind them of what you covered in the last session, but with homework assignments, the thinking, it continues because you're still working, the client is still working on something even after the session is ended, and that homework could be used as a springboard in the next session. Like, what did you learn about yourself in this assignment when you were completing it? And most of what is learned is often a surprise to even the client because it prompted them to delve a little deeper, to explore a little deeper, and be able to become an even more integral part of the therapeutic partnership with the therapist. You never want to create a therapeutic direction without the client. You always want them to take an active partnership with you. Anyone that takes an active partnership is more likely to be successful and have better outcomes because they're invested in the process. They believe in the process. They're committed to the process, and they're willing to do the work. Okay, helping clients create healthier relationships and healthy living environments. This may not come as a surprise, but I believe a lot in the cognitive behavioral therapy approach. However, I believe in the intersection of the trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy approach when it comes to individuals with a traumatized past. I believe that helping clients face and acknowledge their traumatic past is an essential component to reclaiming one's life. Again, I found this to be very helpful because I'm a really strong advocate of cognitive behavioral therapy. However, I found that the benefits are enhanced when trauma-focused is applied. Trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy is a special type of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, used for people who have experienced trauma. It is a talk therapy, especially formulated to address the thoughts associated with the traumatic experience. Trauma-focused CBT has been shown to be beneficial to adult survivors of trauma. Now, consider what we spoke about earlier. Adult survivors of trauma. These are individuals that are carrying weighted baggage of abuse, trauma from childhood, that are still suffering and still struggling with the consequences, the abuse of the past. So this approach, in essence, allows them to put those bags down, to really focus in on the here and now, focus in on how they survived that experience, that they are no longer there. What I've seen with a lot of people who have had traumatized past is that feeling of stuck, feeling that they are in that past situation, they're still being abused, they are still a victim, but in actuality, they have survived the abuse. It takes strength to do that. So empowering them and assisting them with reclaiming their power, their strength, is an essential component of trauma-focused CBT. This is typically a short-term therapy. It's between 8 and 25 sessions. Although further therapy may be needed, after therapy has been completed, to address secondary problems resulting from the trauma symptoms. But I personally like it, again, because sometimes in the therapeutic relationship, we want to tease out all the things and all the traumatizing experience that occurred in childhood. However, by not focusing on strengths, focusing on the trauma happened, but also this is where you are now, without doing that, we can be facilitating that feeling of stuck. I am what happened to me. This is who I am. And that does not define you. That is not who you are. You are an individual with endless possibilities. And removing them from the role of victim to survivor is essential in this process, especially when we're considering it under the context of trauma-focused CBT. The goal is not to keep them a client, a victim. Our goal is to help them transition and adjust their perception of self from victim to survivor, because that's actually what they are. They have endured that traumatic experience. They have gotten through that. Although they have emotional scarring left behind, they have gotten through that. So recognizing that we don't have a victim at our door. We don't have a victim in therapy. We have a survivor in therapy that may need to be reminded that they are survivors, not victims. Adjusting that perception is key. So now we're going to talk finally about how to help your clients adjust their perception of self from victim to survivor. And that's done, a lot of that is done linguistically. When I meet someone and we're in therapy and it is disclosed to me that they had trauma in their past, a past abuse in childhood, I never respond to them and say you were a victim. Linguistically, I remind them that they are survivors. And this is one of the most important things you can do for a client, because you want to convey to them that that transition was not easy. They are oftentimes stronger than what they know, and they need to be given credit for that. They need to be acknowledged for the strength it took not only to survive the experience, but the strength it took to come into therapy and express to you as a therapist, as a psychologist, a clinician, that they are having these issues related to their past. That's not an easy thing to do. Growing up, for some people, the belief is that, oh, it happened years ago, you should be over it right now. It takes strength to say that something that happened to me as a child is still affecting me. Something or someone who abused or I was traumatized affects me today. That is not a weak person that came into your office seeking help. That is a survivor. That is someone that is strong. That is someone that has the capacity for resilience. And for that, it has to be acknowledged, not just in your thinking, but also in your language to your client. We also, by using the term victim, we also don't want to send them a message that, hey, you're still there. You're still powerless. You're a victim, and you haven't taken control. So linguistically, being able to appropriately convey to them, no, as a child, you didn't have the capacity or the power or the strength to do X, Y, and Z, but as an adult, you have taken that back. Allowing someone to reclaim their life is one of the most important things you can do for someone who has a past of trauma. Sometimes they don't see it in themselves. So the goal is not only to get them to see it, but also to reinforce that. We often see things that others, especially our clients, can't see yet because there's so much pain and residual pain from what went on in the past. But now they're in therapy. They're there not out of weakness. They're there out of strength. The strength it takes to come and seek therapy and to stay committed to the process is significant. So we want to really reinforce that and let them know that we see that strength, but also help them identify these personal strengths that they have, that they brought into therapy. We did not give that to them. We're just reinforcing and acknowledging what is already there. So having that opportunity to work with the client in that way and help them transition can certainly have a ripple effect, not just in their personal outlook, but also in the way that they engage with the world around them. Someone who is stuck in the role of victim will see the world as out to get them. But someone that sees their personal strength know their place in the world. They have an idea where they fit in and what they have to contribute to others. So empowering them to see that, to really recognize what they have to contribute to others, is something that is almost immeasurable, because we see that not only in the clients that we work with, but we also see that in that whole family cycle. I know for myself, that family cycle, to some extent, being broken, not seeing children, not seeing other family members, but when positive change is made, oftentimes it transitions to families. When one person makes a change, the change is visible to others. So we feel motivated and almost empowered to make positive changes in our own lives. And we want to get that survivor to a place to recognize that strength, recognize what they have to contribute to others, how they influence everyone around them, and also help them change their perception of the world. Not everyone is out to get you. You're not a victim. You are a survivor. And you are a survivor for these reasons. Because you were able to overcome these trials and tribulations. You were able to do these things. And even when expressing and experiencing negative consequences of what happened to you in your past, rather than suffer in silence, you chose to do something about it. You chose to mobilize. You chose to reach out and seek help. You weren't forced to do so. This is what you saw was wrong. And you chose to make a concerted effort to improve not only your life, but your family members, whether it be your marriage, your employment situation. You made a conscious choice that you wanted to improve some areas in your life. And you chose to do that. And for that, I want to applaud you on the strength it took for you to be here. It couldn't have been easy, but this is just a testament of your strength and your resilience to improving your current situation. Again, working with someone with traumatized past and history, it's a delicate balancing act, because what we don't want to do is keep them there. We don't want to talk about the trauma. Yes, the trauma is important because it's impacting the here and now, but we don't want to leave them stuck in that feeling. We want to help them adjust their thinking to surviving it. We want to identify what they've done to get to where they are now. What did you do? How did you cope with those feelings? Because when you tap into that, you can identify areas of success. When he or she worked on some things that was beneficial to them, you want to identify those times of strength, and you want to be able to tap into it, and you want to be able to reference it to the individual that may not have seen it as a strength when it actually was a strength. It was a skill. And you want to bring them as much as you possibly can into the awareness of their skills as possible. You want them to see that you were strong before you came here. You had a skill set. You managed a lot of different challenges. And I believe you have the capacity to do so again. Sometimes we need a reminder. It doesn't mean that you have to embellish, but you just want to be able to point out some of the historical information presented by the client where he or she may not have seen that they overcame these things, but you want to be able to help them recognize when they have accomplished, different things in life, when they've overcome challenges. You want them to see strength in their actions when they mostly see failures or weakness in their actions. That starts by changing their perception. You may have not passed this exam on this time, but you took it again and passed. That shows commitment. That shows a willingness to really identify what was done incorrectly and make an adjustment to how you study. It can vary based upon your client's situation, but you want to be able to say you didn't give up. It was hard, but you made an effort to continue through this process. You made a concerted effort to be successful, to overcome this challenge. And for that, you have reached X, Y, and Z, or you were able to accomplish X, Y, and Z. You want to be able to present that concretely. I like to be specific in what I'm saying, especially with clients who have issues of trauma. I try not to be vague because it could look like anything and nothing at all. I try to be specific. You went back to school. You decided to get another degree, and you have since gotten that degree. So there are a lot of strengths there that I'm not sure you see yet, but it is there, and you have the ability to succeed. And from what I'm understanding and what you've said to me, you also have the desire. So speaking concretely and not abstractly is also beneficial to people struggling with trauma from the past. Oh, you escaped that. That says a lot. No, you did escape that, but you also accomplished and were able to do A, B, C, and D. It's easier to accept when it's more specific and individualized to the individual you are speaking to. Because often, if they can't see it, if they can't feel it, can't connect with it, can't recognize it, the likelihood of them believing it is slim to none. So I'm really, really happy, and I thank you guys for joining this webinar. I'm not sure if you can tell, but I'm really passionate about trauma and helping individuals regain their power in life, seizing, recognizing, and acknowledging their power in life. And it's really an amazing feeling when someone comes into their own and really sees and takes hold of their opportunities and their potential. So I thank you guys, and I really, really hope that you guys got something out of this webinar. There are some slides attached, so I hope this will help with your work with clients, but not only your work with clients, but understanding individuals that struggle with trauma from the past, because it does have far-reaching arms. It does extend beyond the immediate challenges and harms and issues, but can extend beyond into latent life. Thank you all again. This was a webinar identifying past trauma as it relates to current distress. My name is Dr. Tara Bates Duford. I am the CEO and owner of Family Matters Counseling Group out of Orlando, Florida, and Raleigh, North Carolina. You can visit my website at familymatterscounselinggroup.org. And of course, you'll see my articles for Psych Central. I write for a column called Relationship Corner. Thank you all for joining me. Good night.